Thank you all for coming. My name is David Sapienza. I'm Executive Director of Two Bears Studio. Two Bears is a first-party studio underneath the Vive Studios umbrella. So what does that really mean? It means that we are a wholly owned studio of HTC. So the good news is we get access to early hardware and early software. The flip side is we get access to early software that's usually not ready for release. So our studio actually gets a chance to kind of dog food our own products and then give feedback. So we actually have a lot of experience with the Viveport SDK. So today, I just wanted to go over a brief overview. Some of the key tips, I'm not going to be able to have a chance to go through all the aspects of it, but just some of the key features that we've seen and we think you'd be able to appreciate it. And then the second part I'm going to talk about is our new partnership with Photon. So we have a new relationship, and I'll go over into a little bit how to connect your accounts and some of the benefits from a content point of view, how we've used Photon and how it might benefit you as well. All right, so first off, what is Viveport? Viveport SDK is a tool that allows your content to connect to the Viveport services, the cloud services. So for example, your content is out there, some user wants to use it, it'll connect to the services, verify the user, make sure that the user has the appropriate license, and then give that content to the player. So where do you find it? Simple, you go to developer.vive.com under the resources, and you'll be able to download it right there. Now, I know from managing a studio, anytime you want to take on a new SDK or new software, I've heard it a ton of times where, SDK is easy. Go ahead, you'll be able to figure it out, and I ask for any documentation, and they say, we're still working on it, it's not quite there, but it's easy. But then I have to dedicate resources to people actually trying to figure it out, and that's just time, waste. So one thing I wanted to point out was how nice the documentation is for the Viveport SDK. So if you go to the website, you'll see it's thorough, it's outlined really well, and it even has a bunch of example code for you to be able to utilize. It even, depending on what platform you have, it'll also support that. So we have some Unity code, Unreal code, and even Android as well. All right. So as far as the feature sets, we got arcade tokens, leaderboards, achievements, downloadable content, which we launched last year as well. I'm not going to be able to go into all of them. So the few that I am going to talk to you today about are in-app purchases, digital rights management, of how easy that is to support, and cross-platform. All right, in-app purchase. Okay, so if you look on the left side of the screen, you'll see this is what I want to focus on as a content developer. I just want to focus on launching my content, getting it out there. If I have an upgrade that I want to offer to the user, just give it to them. Let them have access to it, like say a power-up while they're in the moment, go, and then be able to provide that content to the player. I don't necessarily want to worry about all the back-end services. So the good news is Viveport SDK does that for us. So I'll walk you through how that works. So if you launch the content, it's going to initialize with an app ID to the server and get the user information for you. Then it's going to check, it'll check the region, give you the information about the currency, where they're from, all that information that you would need. From there, it'll make a request. And if that's the player, if the player actually wants to purchase something, this is where it'll go check that information, give it back to them, so you can display it. And then if the player actually wants to purchase it, it'll go and validate that. So it's doing the heavy lifting for you. So you can still focus on the main things that are appropriate for you while it does it. Now, how do you actually display that in-game? That was a whole nother aspect in the early days of, okay, so I have this. I want to do a power-up. Okay, I want to buy it. So how do I display now this new user interface of how do I want to purchase this? How do I pay for it? So the Viveport SDK is actually super nice. This is a game that we released last year. It's called Super Puzzle Galaxy. We tried it out with in-app purchases where we gave the game away at a low price, and then we offered in-app purchases. So if you want to unlock new puzzles, then you simply do that. Viveport created an overlay for us, so we didn't have to worry about it. I don't have to even worry about dealing with any player's information. So here you'll see on the far left, I know it might be a little hard to see, but it'll give the player the information that they need. So how much money do they have on their account? It'll display it for them. How much money is this upgrade? It's right there. You purchase it, then it'll bring up the PIN. So if anyone has created a Viveport account, add their credit card, then you'll get the opportunity to put a PIN in. So you put that purchase PIN in, you hit purchase, and then the content will be delivered right to the user. So it's a simple way, and it allows you as an opportunity to have an extra revenue stream. We talked about subscription. People who are more engaged in subscription might be more likely to buy. So this is also a new opportunity for you as well to generate more revenue. All right. Digital rights management. This is actually couldn't be simpler. There's really nothing you can do or to do here on for choice one. One is when you go to submit, there's an option that says wrapper-based DRM. You simply select the checkbox and submit your game. They'll do a wrapper for you. There's a secondary option where you can pull code from the example code in the documentation. This is an example from Unity code. You put it in on the initialization state, you hit the Viveport SDK DRM, and then submit it. So there's no need to create new scripts, to associate it to run new batch files, to associate to a new bin, or to a new publish ID, go to another website. No, it's simple. One-time code, you drop in, hit the checkbox, and then your content's protected. All right. So cross-platform support. So this is how we originally approached it early on, right? So we want to make a PC product, we harness Steamworks. We wanted to go on the mobile VR side, we harnessed Daydream. As Viveport SDK became more mature, they actually offered both wrapped in one, which is very convenient. So what does that mean? So if you do want to support in-app purchases or leaderboards or achievements, all those API sets, you don't have to manage them multiple. This is a one-time thing that you can create, make your calls, and it'll manage it on both platforms. So that's been a big benefit, and it's something that's nice that they do for us, so you don't have to worry about. All right, so again, the features, I'm not going to be able to go into all of them, but leaderboards, achievements, user profile data, arcades, and more, it's all there. So why is this important too is, we've talked about the Infinity program, right? As if you were here for our keynotes, you know that the Viveport or the Vive platform has been growing exponentially. Viveport, I think, was 3 times over from last year to even this year, and it's even growing. Now with subscription Infinity, we're expecting it to grow even further. So what does that mean? It's supporting the Viveport SDK is basically giving you an opportunity to take your content and distribute it to a wider audience. So, and it's not just for the PC side, which is great, but it also supports the mobile side. So whichever path you want to develop your content for, it's going to be able to support both and holistically for the whole ecosystem. All right, next, I'd like to talk about the Photon partnership, which I'm excited about. So why Photon? So when we talked about Photon early in the days, I saw it as a gaming platform, right? For multiplayer gaming sessions. That's how we used it for some of our first games, which were all peer-to-peer or even massive multiplayer games. It was free for like under 20 congruent users, so it was easy to test. It was great. It was on global, and it had a bunch of cross-platform capabilities. But today I wanted to talk a little bit how we're using it, not just from a gaming point of view, but even from an enterprise side. So the studio I run is called Two Bears, and yes, we're part of HTC, but we're actually located in 2 different locations. Part of it's in Taiwan, Taipei, the other part's here in San Francisco. So what we wanted to do is, during the development of our titles, was actually create our own virtual studio. So it was a virtual reality studio where we can always have this instance where we can go in a VR and have multiple, have our sessions always be there. So you can write something on the board, you come back in, tomorrow it's still there, regardless of where you are in the world. So as we started to develop this internal tool, we started to look at, okay, well, what are the solutions we need to make this run for us, right? And Photon started to check off a lot of those checkboxes as well. Even though it wasn't designed for enterprise in that regard, it's actually been a huge benefit for us. And then what it's been able to do now, because it has the infrastructure, it's allowed us to take this thing that's worked well for us and be able to scale it and distribute it wider. So later this year, we are going to launch Vive Sync, which is our meeting and collaboration app. And we are going to be showing it in the room later at GDC on Wednesday. We'll be starting, so you'll be able to come by and check it out. So, all right, so where to find Photon first? So here it is. You just go to developer.viveport.com, enter the console, or you can go to the Photon website directly, which is their dashboard.photon engine. But even easier, if you just go to the Viveport console, you log in, and you're going to see this new gray bar underneath. And you'll see register your email account. So you register your email account. It'll take you to the Photon site, create a new password, and then it'll prompt you to add your new or your app ID. You add it, and that's it. It's about connecting that, and then now your app is connected to the Viveport side and to Photon. All right, so some practical uses. All right, so room management. So we wanted to create these meeting rooms. So we simply called join and create meeting room. So what did this allow us to do? It allowed us to create our own instance, but because we're calling them and they're a global, we're allowed to now scale that same room or instance of a room in multiple instances or across the world. So there was no need for us to implement a room management system. There's no need for us to implement a mechanism for storing that room data, and there was no need for us to manage participants coming in and out. So they handle it all, and so we don't have to. That's been a huge benefit for us. Reliable and unreliable data. This is another simple tool that they offer that will help anyone, I think, if they're trying to support networking, whether it's a social experience or a game. So if you remember, we're VR, right? Supporting 90 frames a second. How much can we push across the network at the same time? All those packets, some gets lost, some doesn't. So what needs to be relied on and what is unreliable? They have a simple bool there called bool send reliable. And that little tool, or that little Boolean, will allow you to easily manage how much throughput you're putting through. So here's an example. So for us, if we're having a meeting, so say this was in VR, right? I have my PowerPoint. I need you guys to see this. So that's something I need you to rely on. That is something that has to be updated every frame, right? If that fails, then this whole point fails. If I had a laser pointer, I'd want that to be reliable too so you can exactly see it. What you may not need is my avatar information, my wrist position, my arms, where I'm at. The fact that I'm moving around like this doesn't really affect it. That can be delayed a little bit if there was some packet loss during the network. So there's things that you'd have to compensate and figure it out. But I'm going to walk you through a little bit of sample code as to why that matters. Or it's not even why it matters, but how easy it is. So you'll see the first line, and you'll see in green are the comments. First one is just calling the event code. This event is just really my avatar's right-hand position. You go down to the next one, it's the position, the player ID, and the coordinates of where that is. Below that is whether it's reliable or unreliable. Again, it's just a bool. We're flipping it to false. Underneath that is which participants we're sending it to, and then we send it. It's pretty straightforward. You can actually, with a simple bool for all your events, you can go in there and you can actually test your network and see actually what's impacting it and what's not. Another big benefit is real-time cloud communication, right? They're global. Mine's a small studio. I don't have the capabilities to manage this across global. They do it for me. So for Arcade Saga, this was something that we harnessed as a multiplayer session. Early days, when we were targeting hardcore gamers, a lot of them, we allowed them to select their own server. So you say, if you're on the US West, I'm on the you can select that and you know you're going to get the best bandwidth. As you start to deal with enterprise customers or people who maybe you don't even want to have them have that choice, then they have a simple way to do that too. So here's inside the inspector. You'll see the Photon settings at the very top, the server settings, and then you'll see under the hosting, there's a section called best region. You just flip to best region, and that means that they're going to go out there, ping, find the best solution for you. And then underneath there's a drop down. So you'll see we've got the Europe, Japan, and US West. Those are different servers that we can spin up. So as you're putting your content online, all you have to do is it's basically a checkbox to figure out what servers all around the world you want to support. You do it, rebuild it, push out an update, and now you support more of a global. If you're only testing one region, then just knock it down to that one. Or if you're not seeing users from a certain region, then lower it down. So it's up to you, and it's super scalable, and it's as simple as a couple checkboxes. And it allows you to manage your content quite nicely. All right, so player properties. This is the next one that I think is important as well. And it's pretty easy that they make it for you. So they're custom properties. It consists of a key value hash table. Now this hash table can be filled in on demand. So what does that mean? That means that these values are synced and cached locally on the clients. So we don't have to go out and fetch them every time for all this data. So if you're networking, right, and you're managing it across all these users, this is something that cache locally and display. So for what we do are like player IDs, maybe the shirt color of your avatar, name, what platform they're on. If say you're in maybe a shooter, you might want to display like your kills, your deaths, your ratios, things like that. This is where those hash tables makes it super convenient for you. So I'll walk you through a little bit of code right here. Okay. So you'll see the set custom properties, that's the call. You'll see the very top one, exit games, client photon, that's really just setting the hash table. Underneath, you just list all the properties you want. So it's hash table add, and you just list them all down. And then the last one is, you call that last one to set the custom properties, and that's it. And you're able to retain it. So from my point of view, Photons gives you simple little tools where you can focus on the actual content itself while they focus on the networking, getting that information out there. So these are just a couple key things I wanted to go through. And in closing, before I switch it over to the Vive input utility, I'm not on the Viveport SDK team. I'm from a content developer side. My interactions with that team proves to me that they are dedicated to making it super easy for you and allowing you to get your content and distribute it to a wide amount of people across a number of platforms. On the Photon side, why I'm so happy about this partnership is they're giving you simple tools to be able to network your content and then distribute it globally. So between these two, I'm really happy with this new partnership, and I hope you guys give it a shot. So with that, I will introduce Dario. Dario, if you come up. There you go.
Thanks.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Dario. I'm the Senior Developer Evangelist at HTC. I primarily been doing developer relations for them for 8 years now. Recently, with the Vive team, of course. There you go, Vive input utility. So I'm basically reintroducing this because we actually had this tool. It launched in July of 2016. It's a Unity plugin, and at the same time, we actually released another two. So in fact, we have 3 on the asset store. Just to briefly review the other 2, the stereo rendering toolkit is basically to help you use basically stereo tricks to do portals, to do mirrors, anything that's difficult for you to do that, we provide that code because we needed to do that internally. And lastly, we also have the video decoder, also known as the media decoder. And it's basically a video player written from scratch. It's high performant, and it even handles 8K videos. So we have all that capabilities, in case you didn't know, on the Unity Asset Store, but we're going to be focusing on the Vive input utility, also known as VIU. So what is it? It's essentially a toolkit, or you just think of it as a set of APIs to help you start to develop for VR. So it's taking the approach of making it simpler for a developer. And I'm going to go into the historical reasons as to why we did this. So it's open source, so it's available not just on the Asset Store, it's also available on GitHub. And yeah, you can just easily look for it on the Asset Store. So why VIU? Well, we found that at the time, we started to develop some in-house projects, and it would just make it easier if we can just have the tools to make it cross-project, even cross-platform, as I'll get into, but primarily to make it easier for developers to share their code. And because at the time, we looked out there and we didn't see anything that was really designed well, and there was a lot of boilerplate code that people would just copy and paste all over the place. Basically, just to give you a brief little history of developing for VR so far as the launch of the resurgence of VR in 2016. So previous to that, we announced the product in 2015. And even before that, what developers had to do with our partner, Valve, they actually had to code to OpenVR, which is a set of C and C++ API available, open source, and GitHub. And what they had to do, if they were a Unity developer or Unreal developer, they had to actually write their own Unity plugins. They had to write their own plugins because there was no interface at the time. Eventually, Valve did have someone create a Unity plugin that was shared privately. And eventually, by the time we launched in April 2016, Valve did release the SteamVR plugin for Unity. And that's how a lot of people started coding for the first time for VR. We got a lot of interested people learning Unity for the first time because that was their entry towards VRs through Unity, through that Unity plugin. Eventually, there was a need to document that. It was a little difficult to use. In fact, I think I was one of the first to blog about how to use it in October of that year. But by the time in October of 2015, by the time we launched in 2016, we already internally started using our Vive input utility. And we decided to launch it in July 2016 and share it with everyone. There was really no agenda or purpose other than making it easier for developers to develop for the Vive, but not just only the Vive. Just to continue here, it's an example of why we needed it at the time, because things have changed since. When you use SteamVR, you had to do all this boilerplate kind of stuff. You actually had to get an instance of a component of a manager, so you can get a device out of it, depending on the device index. I don't even remember how much that was. But we just basically started to use static functions in C# so that you can actually just do Vive input dot, and if you have autocomplete, you can see all the functions at once, and you can just select what you need to do. All you need to do is, if you want to get a trigger press, you just need to indicate which controller and what kind of button you're looking for. Controllers are specified by roles, such as right hand, left hand, and I'll get into that in a bit as well. So there was a lot of things that would just made it a lot difficult for, especially someone who's new to programming. Here's another example where we actually get an analog value from the triggers to do something. So you can get axes. A lot of the things you can do in SteamVR, you can obviously do in VIU, but we decided to wrap it in a much more elegant way. And also, we also have the ability to do callbacks, because a lot of times you don't want to just call a function inside your update loop. You want to be able to get notified when an event happens. And of course, you can add a listener and call that function. So this is kind of the set of, and this is growing, this is a set of features. Initially, the main features we were just interested was getting the button events and getting the tracking info from the track devices, the poses. And essentially, that's why it's called the Vive input utility. But it's grown to be much more than that. I think the most important feature that I usually have had to define it in one sentence is basically it's a cross-platform tool that basically lets you target, use one code base, one common set of APIs to target different platforms. And again, it's called Vive input utility, but we want users to be able to use this for the Oculus Rift, for Oculus Go, for all the standalones, for the Wave, and so forth. And I'll show you how to do that. So some of these I'm not going to cover right now. The ones I'm not going to cover is there's one that helps you basically use for mixed reality video. That was when SteamVR introduced features that breaks your screen into 4 pieces so that you can combine them with a camera, an external camera. We made it a little easier with Vive Input Utility so that you can call that up on demand, and you can actually enter the values for the camera parameters right on the screen, on the game screen. We don't have to edit anything on a text file or anything. That's one of the features that I'm not going to cover, but I just mentioned it. And the other one is, for the Wave 6 DOF controllers, we have a feature that if you don't have the 6 DOF controllers, the kit, or now the integrated version, you can actually connect to the USB drive, like a mini keyboard, and just basically do with keys all the 6 DOF positions, just to make your debugging a little easier with the actual device. But there are also simulators. This is a list of the included examples. It's not many. We wanted to keep this download really, really compact. It's just the very basics. There's like 7 examples there. I would think if you're just starting out, the first 3 or 4 of those are pretty critical for basically interacting with objects with Unity native buttons and so forth, and be able to do, and we like to use the Unity event system a lot. It just makes it for clean coding to go between actions and components that you want to affect on. There's also some examples of teleporting and so forth. I want to show you some videos and you'll get a better idea of the capabilities. So multi-platform, again, this is my favorite settings window, because this is where you actually select whether you're going to be targeting. Right here, for example, we're targeting Vive and the Rift, but you can actually decide, again, using the same code base. You don't have to change anything in your scene. You can actually switch to focus, so you can switch to other choices there. We also have a simulator mode, so in fact, you don't have to have a device connected at all. You can actually just use your mouse and keyboard to move the controllers and the headset and so forth. Here's another example where the focus is selected instead, and in this case, you have an option to control how the 3DOF ARM IK will move, so that you can, a lot of people will be starting out in the Vive or moving to the focus. They have the first limitation, of course, besides the GPU restrictions and managing draw calls, which is a separate topic. Here, if you're just concerned about how to deal with the 3DOF controller, this gives you an easy way to start adjusting that ARM IK. Role mapping. So we decided to make groups of these roles to describe devices, instead of dealing with specific device names or device IDs that could change. So we have a mapping system. I mean, basically, it uses the serial number of the device, and it stores it as a JSON text file. But we decided to have a tool that lets you do this mapping very easily. It's the binding interface. So we can call this up in any app, any Vive Input Utility app with a shortcut. In fact, it's Right-Shift-B for binding. And you can actually change that shortcut or disable this altogether. But we found that it makes it easy that this appears on your game window, not in the headset, and it allows you to find what devices there are there, and then assign different roles to each device. In fact, I have a video that shows that. So here we're starting to run. And this is just a simple scene, and it starts running. But you can now, you call up Shift-B, and now you can start seeing how you can map specific roles, whether they're by different types of roles, body role or hand role or tracker role. So here you can see there's, I selected a controller, I select what role I want it to be, and then you just bind it there, and you can just keep adding devices. I can select a second controller, and so on. And I think this has become useful for people who are always swapping controllers or trackers because they run out of batteries. So in fact, you can actually map more than one device to the same role as backup, and it'll just work. Here I'm mapping a tracker. In this case, I think I'm going to assign it to the hip and so forth. Here's an example at a festival. In fact, this is backstage at a festival where they had a dome and they had some projection mapping happening. So you can see they're using the Vive input utility binding interface. So in real time, they can actually manage the trackers they have. In this case, there was trackers, people were dancing with trackers, and it was affecting the projection mapping. But they really loved this tool, the developer, because it just made it easy. They were running 6 to 10 trackers at any one time. So should anything go wrong, they could just map it in real time. And here's another example where early on, this is really an early version of inside VR UI binding system. And the point of this is that you can actually define your own interface for users to use. And here, for example, I just touch the device on that, and it decides to select that as the device you want to map. And then you just point to what you want to map. And again, the APIs allow you to create your own user interface for this. All right, so up next, I want to just walk through a basic tutorial, which is what I usually do live coding, but I'm going to just show a video. And basically from scratch, I want to, with apologies to those seasoned developers, this is a very simple Hello World app, but what I want to do is just show you how easy it is for even a non-programmer to start using Unity and the Vive input utility and just get some interaction going as a first app. So what I'm doing here is I'm just simply going to launch Unity and then go to the asset store and then find VIU and then install that plugin. And by the way, now you don't actually need to have SteamVR plugin installed already. What we do is we look at what's underlying, what other plugins there are. So if there is SteamVR plugin, we will map to that and use facilities that are needed that requires SteamVR. If not, we just use the Unity XR APIs. And of course, we just accept the defaults for the Vive input utility. And then what you need to do next is what we do for any, and if you're familiar with the SteamVR plugin, for example, there's a camera rig. What we're going to do is we're going to find a prefab, what we call the Vive rig. And we're just simply going to drag and drop that into our scene. And after we do that, of course, we have to disable the default camera because the Vive rig includes a camera, support for the controllers, support for trackers. And that's pretty much it. If you were to run this, you should be able to see your controllers. Now here, I need to put something else in the scene. I'm just adding a plane for the floor. I decided to put a sphere there, maybe move it up and out of the way so it's not in your face when you start VR. And basically, for minimal interaction, what we're going to try to do is go and add a component to the sphere so that it's, well, first of all, I'm adding some physics to the sphere so it can actually fall down. You can see it do something. But, and even in this case, if I start running this, we're not really there yet because as of Unity 2018.3, it turns out you need to also go to the package manager and enable OpenVR. So it's added a couple more clicks. So my goal was to have the minimal number of clicks to get something up and running that's interactive in VR. I'm going to go to the package manager now. And this is fairly new to a lot of Unity developers who have not moved to 2018.3 yet. So you have to select the OpenVR and just simply install it. It's a short install. Just basically this enables the native integration for VR from Unity with OpenVR. Okay, so after doing that, so this next time I run it, then I should be able to connect it to my headset and it should work. And just with this rig, we have two rigs actually, Vive Camera Rig and Vive Rig. Vive Camera Rig is similar to the traditional camera rig. Vive Rig adds an additional script to do some things with the controllers, such as, well, right now you can see I'm trying to grab the ball, but nothing's happening. So we still need to do things. But we do have some built-in things for like teleporting, showing the teleporting, but we're not teleporting yet. So there's one more thing, a couple more things you have to do before you have an interactive scene. Basically, you have to go and add a grabbable script to the objects you want to interact with. So here, I'm just selecting the sphere here, and then we're going to go to add a component to it from our VIU collection of components. So you just go down to HTC VIU, and then you can actually just select a grabbable, in this case a basic grabbable. And that's all you need to do to your objects, and now you can grab them. The other thing I want to do is teleport around, so I selected the floor there, the plane, and likewise I just add a component from HTC's VIU collection and just make it teleportable. So we just added those components, they're really scripts, and you're up and running without having to actually code anything. And again, the beauty here is that you can introduce this to schools and have a lot of students start learning how to do VR very quickly. So finally here I can grab it and throw it. And for the advanced developers, the reason why you're seeing the controllers as white is because we provide models for all the platforms we support separately from SteamVR. So this is why I said SteamVR plugin is optional. It'll fall back to this. But if you have SteamVR plugin, it'll use the runtime low-level models that are more accurate, and they have animations to it. So it's the best of both worlds, basically. This is an example of doing custom models for your controllers, and there's also an option to do pointers. So all of that comes really inside, it's built in, but if we wanted, we could actually dig in a little further. And for example, right here, you see the grabbable script gives you all these options to customize it, how exactly it's going to be grabbed. You can see that it uses the Unity event system, so you can do things before it's grabbed, after it's grabbed. So it's very modifiable without actually going into code. You can actually drag and drop components to other things as well. And just one more thing I just wanted to show, the controller manager sample script. I guess this is a sample script. You can modify it and create your own script. But basically, it shows you all the options for mapping the different buttons to different events, to different functionalities. So it's very customizable, and we want to keep it simple, though. We don't want people to take entire working projects and just cut and paste. I think a lot of professional studios like our SDK because of its simplicity and because you could do all these type of event-based callbacks and so forth. I think the next thing I want to show is actually how to port this now to another platform. So here's the settings like I showed you earlier. So now we want to be able to, let's say we want to use the focus. So what you have to do is just basically switch platform, and this is very similar to when you have the build settings and you switch platforms from there. And I've already previously installed the Vive Wave SDK, and here just accept defaults because we're going to move to the world of Android. And I think the only thing you need to do that's Android specific, aside from installing the Android tools beforehand, is to change maybe the package name so they could compile. But other than that, the scene is untouched. And that's the beauty of this, is you can save so much money porting from one platform to the other. So I think I switched platforms. You notice I've cut out a lot of the loading bars. And you can see it's targeting Android. And the only thing we have to do is just go to the player settings and maybe change the name of the app and so forth. But I'm just simply going to change the package name, just give it something unique, because it will complain if you don't change that. And then once we do that, you can just hit build and run, and then you're off and running on a new platform. In fact, I do have this showing what it looks like on the Focus. And you'll see the same exact scene, but of course, what you'll see is a different controller. I give it a name for the APK, and then it should just build and then run. And here it is running inside. I'm using a screen capture to show you what's actually running on the Vive Focus. And again, it's the same scene, but this time, of course, you're going to see this 3DOF controller, and you can see obviously the same functionality. You can teleport, and you can grab it and throw it and so forth. You can see there's a range for, even though it's 3DOF, it's limited. There's a range of movement that's still possible. So again, depending on your use case You may be able to port easily or not, but you could adjust that. And yeah, this very basic hello world application can actually turn out to be a game. You can just try to prevent it from falling over the edge there and add scoring and so forth. So you're on your way, again, with minimal scripting, if any, and you can start learn how to develop in Unity. And again, there's the benefits for beginners and the benefits for more advanced because of the other tools that we provide, from role mapping to the other list that I had. All right, so I'm going to move on to, this is a short summary of the steps we did. Again, getting started, it's just simply drag and dropping a prefab into your scene, optionally adding a grabbable to your objects and teleportable to your, if you want to teleport. Again, this is a very simple example, so I don't really recommend having to do this by default for every app. Teleportable is just one means of locomotion. We are part of an alliance with a number of companies to do best practices. So I would recommend checking that out. SteamVR input system compatibility. So this is something that happened. By the way, what I was referencing is xra.org. There's some guidelines there for best practices. The SteamVR input system compatibility. So in the past year or so, they've been working on creating a new way of mapping for having the user be able to remap input buttons on their controllers and so forth. We do not have that. We have a role mapping. It sounds similar, but it's very different. And basically, we have steps so that you can actually be able to build, because their new plugin actually broke compatibility with a lot of old code. So you need to be able to do these steps. We automate this a bit through when you install it, and if it sees SteamVR, it'll prompt you for these steps. But it's just a few steps. But what I need to explain is part of our roadmap here, is that we are considering a new input system. Again, this is just an early proposal because of the pros and cons with the different input systems. In some cases, like in our case, we're very, very good in having this role mapping, but not necessarily good in having this input binding for buttons and so forth. Whereas SteamVR is vice versa. And you'll see in different scenarios, it's either missing or so the goal for our next 2.0 version is basically to have both be very good solutions. And it's going to take coordination and giving back to the community. We're also part of the OpenXR effort, which, as you know, is going to make binary compatibility across VR and XR devices. So that's something to look forward to, as well as WebXR. They're going to have the same issues if they want input binding and that type of compatibility. So it's going to be a challenge for input, but I think Vive Input Utility is really going to help us with this. One other thing that's also coming with the roadmap is support, of course, for the Vive Cosmos. So for most of these new platforms, it's easy to just, the code doesn't have to change at all. The only thing that's changing is the models that we're adding and maybe the input bindings. So it makes it easy to even support, for example, the Microsoft headsets as well, the mixed reality headsets, because of the fact that we dropped down to XR API support, a lot of the support for additional devices comes for free. Next, I want to be able to introduce a special guest. She's a professor at the University of Texas and teaches a VR class, and they use VIU exclusively. Yeah, so that's. Oh, and if I could have audio for this video.
Hi, everyone. I'm MJ. I'm an assistant professor of practice at the University of Texas. I teach game design. Is the video running?
I'm trying to get it through.
Technical difficulties.
There you go.
Okay. So this is a short video from some of my students. So one of the classes I teach is a VR class where my students make game projects for the Vive. And in previous years, we had to code all of the functionality ourselves, all the way down to detecting collision between the virtual controller and a physics object. This year, I was lucky enough to find the Vive input utility before the semester started. And so my students had a chance to use this in their projects. And this made it a lot easier for students who had less technical experience, so they could get right into Unity and make their own VR scenes. This year I had very few coding students, so I actually don't think this class would have been successful without the Vive input utility. So on behalf of myself and all of my students, I want to say thank you to the Vive developers for creating such a useful and versatile plugin for us.
Thank you. Let's start it again. All right, so now I'm gonna move to Q&A for both sessions. So if you have any questions, there's a microphone over there. So again, this is Q&A for if you have any questions for Vive Input Utility, or if you have any questions for the Viveport SDKs. You want to come up?
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much for the presentation. I had a quick question about open standards. You mentioned OpenXR, and then before that you had mentioned another consortium.
XRA.org.
Okay. And is that at the application level, hardware level?
XRA.org is an association that's really providing guidelines like best practices for design.
Oh, design principles.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So
And XRA.org.
I was
great.
referencing, when to use, what locomotion to use, and when and where, and really to think of all your options when you're designing, which is a whole other topic, I know. But I figure I'd bring that up because there are guidelines out there.
Thank you.
As far as OpenXR, that's still ongoing. I hope there's going to be some announcements soon, but that's moving along very well.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Steven. I had a question about Vive tracker input. We noticed with some of the SteamVR binding changes that were recent, it changed a lot of our
Right.
tracker input. Are you guys still supporting actual button input on the trackers?
Yes, we are. So there's these pogo pins on the trackers.
Right.
They still work. What's changed is the fact that right now, because of the input binding that SteamVR introduced, you're limited to having to assign them as left-hand or right-hand
Right.
inputs. You can't have inputs coming from more than those two.
Right, so that was my essential
this
question.
is where I say there's this balance between role binding and I guess action binding.
Right. So that was my essential question is, will we still be able to have two motion controllers giving input and also a third, fourth, or fifth connected device that also allows you to have input? It seems right now you have to turn off one of your motion controllers, use the Vive tracker in your left or right hand
Right, that's
in order
correct.
for the input to work using the Vive utility. I was just wondering, is that the way it's going to continue to be,
No,
or
we're
are we
looking
doing
forward
something
to
wrong?
working with Valve and see what we can accomplish together.
Okay.
As you notice in part of my screens there, we had roles for like n number of controllers, n number of trackers. So obviously that kind of broke as well. So you have to assign trackers as hands to get the inputs. And again, you're kind of limited to, right now, to left and right only. Additional ones will just be tracked. They will be tracked though. So you can have any number, not any number, but within the 64 limit for tracking to get poses, but you won't have inputs per tracker. You're just limited to two.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hello, my name's Brendan Walker. I'm an Unreal Engine dev. So I saw a lot of exciting stuff here. I wondered if the Vive input utility, it sounded like there was some tentative support for Unreal Engine, but I wasn't sure where that stood. It's on GitHub, so I presume we could always support it
Sorry, it was
ourselves.
tentative support for it.
Oh, for Unreal Engine, for the Vive input utility, if that, because it looked like all the
Unreal.
stuff was very
Yeah,
Unity.
this is specific to Unity. Unreal is something we've been thinking about, yes, but a lot of that is managed by Unreal. Yeah, it's something we can definitely look into, but right now, primarily it was focused on Unity.
Sure. And the second question I had actually was for the Viveport SDK. When we were using that originally, it looked like it was very much a lower level direct API. It wasn't using Unreal's online subsystem, and so we kind of shimmed that in ourselves. But I was curious if that was something you guys are planning on doing at some point, or?
You know, I'll have to get back to you on that. Since I'm not on the SDK team, I don't know their exact roadmap, but if you follow up with me after, I can get an answer for you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I had a question about role mapping. So in the past, I've used the older input systems, and I ran into the issue where the right hand and the left hand would frequently get switched. Does role mapping solve that problem?
Yes, it solves that because then it binds it to the actual serial number of the tracker.
Okay, so that means every time I use one controller.
It makes, if you're doing mocap, for example, or you're actually having your actor, tying them up with all these trackers, the last thing you need is for the device IDs to switch. This makes it very easy, especially for left-hand, right-hand controllers.
So would I be able to put a sticker on the controller that says this is always a right hand?
I'm sorry?
Would I be able to put a sticker on the controller like this is always a right hand?
Yes.
Okay,
I've
thank
seen
you.
that done. Is there any other questions? And before anyone leaves, I just want to remind you that the next session for Vive Developer Day is going to be all about Wave platform. So you'll get to learn about the Wave platform SDKs. I highly recommend it. So just stick around.
Cool. Thanks.